So the Sister Battle Codex is here and it's looking rather great. Let's talk about some powerful detachments and really impactful unit changes with an overview of 9 of the biggest things. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Adepta Sororitas, and in this video I thought I'd cover some of the biggest and most impactful changes of the Codex, just a few things that I found the most fun. The book's gone on pre-order today, and while I do want to make a full review of the Codex, which I will get out and released as soon as possible, I thought on the way to that I'd just stop off and make a bit of a roundup overview of some of the biggest and most interesting changes, some of the things that I think are going to impact things really nicely for the sisters. Hopefully I'll get that book review done later tonight, though I might try and cover the Pariah Nexus changes and do a Gene Stealer Cult roundup before that. There's definitely quite a lot going on in the 40k news. Overall, though, I feel like the book feels like a very positive one, far more so than basically any of the other Imperial Codexes, maybe bar Space Marines in 10th edition so far. I feel like for Admech, Dark Angels, and Adeptus Custodes, the broad tone of it was kind of nerfs and underwhelming things, but they really seem to have delivered a good codex here, lots of fun impactful rules, 4 detachments that all look interesting in their own way, and genuine datasheet changes that make the units more fun and interesting. I really wouldn't be too surprised if a few points cost rises happen when the digital points drop, but even then I feel like it's better to have some higher costed units and cool, impactful and interesting detachments and abilities, rather than the opposite of that. Jumping in, one rule that's unchanged is Acts of Faith, which I think is generally a good thing. No major changes to the mechanic, you get miracle dice when sisters units are destroyed, and the same command phase generation rule, and you can still apply them in the same way to the same rolls, often things like plug in automatic sixes to damage results, really big charges, or saving throws when you desperately need one. I'm glad that stayed the same really, given that it's a pretty impactful and interesting rule, and kind of evocative in the Emperor intervening to guide the faithful to victory. One change for the generation of them, though, is the Simulacrum piece of war gear has improved a bit. Now, for any of the units that have these, you get to generate a miracle dice if they're on an objective. That ability has been moved from the Battle Sister squad just to this bit of war gear. You roll a dice, and on a 4+, you generate a miracle dice, and then the miracle dice generated counts as the result that you rolled on that 4+. So it basically means that any dice generated that way will be a 4, 5, or 6, so they're guaranteed to be useful ones. Overall, that's kind of a flat buff to Miracle Dice generation. The Battle Sisters will do it better, and other units will do it as well. It does replace the ability of the Simulacrum to allow you to generate a Miracle Dice if you destroyed a unit by this unit, though. I guess to be fair, it does mean that the Battle Sisters are a bit less reliable in generating those dice. They will only do it on a 4+ rather than automatically, but at least the ones they do generate are better ones. That does mean that the Battle Sister rule needs replacing though, and it looks like they get sticky objectives instead of the Miracle Dice generation thing. Again, that's a really powerful rule to have in an army, and I feel like they'll still be pretty much auto-include as they are now. Well worth taking between that and the Simulacrum, and you can still run them in multiple small units with the Immolators. It's just really quite a nice rule to mark objectives and then have the option of either moving away or getting gunned down and still holding that objective. It won't be victory point relevant in literally every single game, but sometimes it really can be. Another major change to the more rank and file sisters is to Novitiates, which gain Infiltrate. I feel like that was a rule that maybe they could have had in the first place. Not really too sure why they didn't either have that or Scouts to start with. And it's really quite a nice ability to have for the sisters, given that you've actually got something to start in the midfield on the board now. It can be really big against certain armies that go heavy into their own infiltrators or scout moves just to give you that breathing space. You still need to commit to a unit of 10 of them though, so it's not going to be a minimum investment squad or anything like that, but I feel like that's a big win for them. For detachment, we've got the Army of Faith, Penitent Host, Bringers of Flame, and Hallowed Martyrs. The Army of Faith is very miracle focused and very good for jump infantry. Interesting aura abilities on the stratagem section for them. The Penitent Host helps out Repentia, Arco-Flagellants, and the Penitent Engines in really quite big ways. They've both got scary core rules and scary stratagems. The Bringers of Flame are kind of old school Argent Shroud, Melter and Flamer that moves fast and gets +1 strength when they're in 12 inches and have a few powerful damage and defense type boosts. And Hallowed Martyrs is reinterpreted from the Index detachment, though there are changes. I think one of the best things about these detachments is that beside the Penitent Host, which really leans into those Penitent units, all the rest of them look like they've got genuinely very good value for a balanced Sisters of Battle army. I feel like that's something that several codexes have got wrong, just far too much leaning into unit keywords to differentiate detachments, and not having as many choices for fielding your whole army in a slightly different way. Focusing in on one of those, and we've got the Bringers of Flame. As per Games Workshop's previews, that was advance and shoot, and +1 strength within 12 inches for your ranged weapons. Really nice for strength 10 melters in particular, and great for Ministor and flamed weapons getting extra threat. If you've got a ranged focused army, then this is just absolutely great support in my opinion. Otherwise, for a few stratagem highlights, they've got that 1 command point for lethal hits in melee 1. Always good, particularly if you've got some mass lower strength attacks, which a few units have. There's 1 command point to worsen enemy AP by 1, so basically Armour of Contempt but for Sisters, which seems rather excellent on Paragon Warsuits in particular. Their 2+ saves will really enjoy that. A fun one for Torrent Devastating Wounds, so stealing the homework of the Firestorm Assault Force even more there. And then also it does seem to have some transport synergy as well. Again, very similar to the Space Marine Firestorm, 1 for advance and disembark, and 1 for a reactive shooting stratagem where the transport gets shot, the unit jumps out and shoots back what attacked it. Finally, for a couple of the fun enhancements, there's that shooting buffing one which maybe seems like one of the best. Sustained hits for your lead unit, like some nice Retributors, and Torrent getting +1 hits. And another fun one that allows you to basically mash 2 miracle dice together. If you've got 2 low rolls, then you get to combine them to a maximum of 6, so you could put 2 junk miracle dice and make them into a more useful one. Kind of nice to have that manipulation, but it does mean that you'd have less miracle dice to go around, and a few units like Vahl will happily eat some low ones. Talking of big hitting multi-melters, the Paragon Warsuits got a boost with +1 to hit against monsters and vehicles. That replaces their fallback and deal damage type option that they had before, which did seem like a bit of a curious choice for them, to be honest. I feel like that's quite a nice rule for them, as it puts them a bit more into that slaying heavy things type role, which really feels like is appropriate given what they are. I guess that rule won't be quite as relevant for the Vahl led unit if you've got one. They were going to be hitting most of those hits anyway. The change to Retributors I think is really quite a fun one though. Previously they got reroll wound rolls of 1 just permanently. It looks like they still get that, but they get an additional fun rule. Basically, if any enemy unit kills any Adepta Sororitas unit earlier in the game, then that unit kind of gets Retributor marked effectively. And then from that point onwards, any Retributors targeting that unit gets to fully reroll wound rolls against them. And I really like the way that's both impactful with the unit's name, they're genuinely dealing out some retribution, and it's also a very powerful rule as well, particularly for multi-melters being able to wound reroll against things that they might have wounded on 5s. I really like it and feels like a fun and fluffy way to add extra threat, and big scary enemy units are probably likely to be killing your sister's unit at some stage. For datasheets that have been gained or lost, there's only one properly new datasheet in the jump pack Canoness. Nice to see her return as an option, as she was lost quite a long time ago with her fancy new model from that Army of Faith. She's genuinely looking like quite a scary fighty character with a bunch of attacks that hit accurately, damage 2 on them, and then once per game she takes a leaf out of some of the other captains from other factions, getting extra attacks and devastating wounds on her attacks, meaning that for her points cost she's genuinely a massive melee threat and seems like an actual interesting choice within a unit of Zephyrin perhaps. Otherwise, technically there's a new Minister and Priest, but that's more consolidating the datasheets for the Missionary and Preacher into one, so it's more losing a datasheet than gaining one there, and then the Crusaders and Death Cult Assassins have both gone away. I don't know if Games Workshop might eventually get round to releasing a plastic kit for them and returning them to the range, but given that they were older kits that aren't in plastic, not really too surprising that they're gone. Another really interesting detachment is the Army of Faith. This is the one where basically across the army, all Sisters units can perform 2 acts of faith per phase rather than 1, similar to the Triumph's old boost that it had on one of the relics, but army-wide. This one I feel just doubles down on making the miracle dice more useful and means that you can really focus firepower on one unit just getting insanely dangerous. Say plugging in automatic lethal hits with a multi-melter and then automatic 6 damage if you have one. You still do need to spend those miracle dice, though this detachment does come with a few other ways to farm them a bit easier just in passing. One of the easiest ways for that is an enhancement that gives you a leadership test at the start of each of your command phase. If you pass that, then you generate a miracle dice, so probably good for another 3 or so miracle dice over the course of a game, provided your character is alive and on the board. And the Blade of St. Eleanor is here, instead getting +1 AP, +1 strength and precision, and generating miracle dice if you slay any models. Otherwise though, I feel like the stratagems are all really interesting for this one. There's a nice easy one for 1 command point for extra AP when you're shooting or fighting. Again, you generate a miracle dice if you slay any models. And a similar one where you still get that miracle dice generation for 1 command point for Lance in the fight phase. There's some really easy damage dealer ones there. You could have AP2 heavy flamers or an extra AP in melee, both of which could be absolutely awesome against high save foes, and lance melee is pretty great for sisters too. Otherwise, there's one command point to return to reserve for jump units, and then 3 interesting aura abilities that you can trigger. You have to select a jump unit with these, or you can just use it on a sister's unit outright, but you don't get the aura. If there's units within 3 inches of a jump pack unit that you trigger it on though, then they can pick up either -1 to hit, a 5+ save against mortal wounds, or ignores all modifiers besides saving throws, all of which are pretty powerful depending on what you're fighting. It does mean that one big jump pack unit could potentially cover a good chunk of your army with that. The -1 to hit one seems quite nice on paper. That could shield you from a lot of firepower against an enemy unit with low ballistic skill. Another fun, slightly random improvement is one of the worst sisters units getting way better. Aestred and Agathae Dolan basically seem to be targeted by massive improvements. I think that's fairly nice given that the miniatures are pretty cool with that relic banner. Previously they gave you devastating wounds to melee weapons, now it's all weapons on the unit that they're leading, not just melee. So pretty nice for certain things being able to overcome high saves and invulnerable saves there. And now if you put them with a unit that's likely to kill some things, they generate a miracle dice whenever their unit slays another, and Agathae Dolan herself generates miracle dice when she's slain, getting a D3 of the things, meaning that they might be quite a nice unit to go charging off into the fray, kill some things and then get killed in return. I feel like that's quite a big improvement overall, and they can attach 2 Novitiates if they want to. Aestred Thurger still has a strength 5 AP2 and damage 2 melee, so still adds a bit of threat to the squad beyond all the boosts. Next up, we've got the return of the Hallowed Martyrs detachment. It has the same name and the same core rule as in the index, so basically damage boosts for units that were below, and then a further +1 to wound if you're below half strength. Pretty useful stuff, though you're reliant on your opponent to trigger it. Most of the things are at least somewhat similar. The 1 command point to restore a slain character now generates you an extra D3 wounds on that character, so a pretty reasonable chance to return to full health for Canoness or Palatine. To be honest, in this detachment, that's a kind of mixed blessing though, I suppose. There's a 1 command point for reroll hit rolls in melee. That one replaced the +1 to wound in melee stratagem though, so again maybe a mixed blessing. Though it does look like they've had a major boost to the stratagem that forces one of their units to hit another one in melee. That now means that if you've got one unit tagging an enemy unit in close combat and use this stratagem, literally all the models in that unit must attack the unit that charged it, even if they aren't in engagement range and can't even allocate attacks to that unit that you're forcing them to attack. Previously it was just models in engagement range, which was still pretty massive in itself on big single models, but basically means that you could charge 2 things into an enemy unit, know for a fact that they can only kill one of your units, and leave your other unit safe for another turn. On the enhancement side of things, it still looks like the Blade of St. Eleanor is actually still here, despite the name of it being moved to the Army of Faith. You still have an enhancement with the +1 strength, damage, and attack here. It's just named through suffering strength, and still gets the extra damage if the unit's injured. Should still be good for a Palatine or maybe a jump Canoness. Talking of Canonesses though, they got a major glow up in this book. Previously they were kind of rarely used and got you reroll hit rolls for your unit. Now they've changed to the more standard captain style buff of getting a free battle tactics stratagem, and quite a lot of the ones in the detachments are battle tactics, so in general that's a pretty positive thing. If you take the Rod of Office loadout now, that still gives you some rerolls. Reroll ones to hit for your lead units rather than the chance to generate a CP that it had before. I'd say it's probably the choice between that and the Blessed Blade, which definitely got better. 4 attacks at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2 rather than 3 now, and it also picked up lethal hits as well. Overall that's quite a significant improvement, particularly with tangling with high toughness things. Vahl got some pretty interesting rules changes as well. She's gained toughness 7 from T6 and still has her ability to reroll hits and wounds for her unit, so that's still really nice on Paragons, maybe a little bit less relevant on them against vehicles I suppose. For her special rules though, she's had an interesting change to her abilities. She gets +3 attacks on Fidelis and the Lance of Illumination, and now rather than just getting it once for free in the battle, you can use it multiple times, but it costs 1 junk miracle dice spent in the command phase each time you want to trigger it. You could just discard something like a 1 though. Kinda nice that she can still have her boosted attack profile multiple times. I feel like that probably is worth it, particularly combined with her other special rule, which means that if she personally slays a unit, then you get to gain 1 miracle dice, so it does mean that she's got at least a good chance of recouping her investment if she does manage to kill something. Overall, I'd say that's probably an improvement. Finally, we've got the Penitent Host. This is the one that buffs Penitent keyword units, which are the Arco-Flagellants, Repentia, Mortifiers, Penitent Engines, and the Ministorum Priest also gets the keyword as well. These get their sort of combat doctrine style buff with multiple turns of good things for those keyword units. On one turn, everything gets a plus 3-inch move. On one turn, you get a very dangerous +1 attack and +1 strength on the charge. And on one turn, you get a 2+ fight on death, which is pretty brutal to counter melee armies. You trigger these at the start of the battle round, so if you go second, the opponent might see what's coming. They do get some fun stratagems though. Critical hits on a 5+, which could be kind of brutal for pretty much all of them with the sustained hits. 1 command point to advance and charge for any penitent unit. If the penitent engines do it, then they get to automatically move 6 inches, seeing as they can advance and charge anyway. When you combine that with a miracle dice, you could have some crazy threat ranges on these units now. Even just for a unit of Repentia using a Miracle Dice 6, then that would be around about a 20-inch charge move on average. Never mind on the turn where they get the plus 3-inch movement buff, which would be even further. Otherwise, there's a really interesting reactive surge move type thing, similar to what Khorne Berserkers or certain other datasheets get, but with one crucial difference in that basically you get to make that reactive move before the enemy unit's even shot. It's done where they're selected as a target, which is kind of mad. Potentially means in the wrong circumstances your opponent could target a unit, then they just reactive move and jump into combat with another one of your enemy units, and then they can't be shot anymore, so you have to declare on something else. That's a seriously spooky ability and could really mess with enemy target priority. Finally, a few of the enhancements look really good as well. One of them means a Palatine can join Repentia, which means that you can get lethal and sustained hits on a 5+ re-rolling with that critical hit stratagem. That's going to give you a unit that can blend basically anything, and it sounds like this detachment's going to have the tools to get them where they need to be. And then there looks like a fairly auto-include one, where if this character's on the board, then every time a penitent unit kills an enemy unit, you get to flip one of your miracle dice to a result of a 6. That's seriously powerful, turning your weakest miracle dice into absolutely amazing ones. Provided you are taking a bunch of penitent units, which I'm sure you will be in this, they'll certainly be killing things. It should mean that a good proportion of your miracle dice over the course of the game will be 6s. Overall, at first impressions, it's looking seriously interesting stuff. Look forward to hearing some of your early takes on the Codex. I'll certainly look forward to making a full review of the book as soon as I get a chance. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that. I do tend to post new videos just about every day, and I'll certainly have a few more things for the Sisters of Battle. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all the videos coming. Channel Patreons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.